girls are among many children suffering in the nation's fight against Boko Haram. A report by UNICEF says about 800,000 have fled their homes. That number has more than doubled in less than a year. Some have escaped to neighboring nations like Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. UNICEF says many children are separated from their families. That leaves them vulnerable to abuse and violence. To talk more about the threat of Boko Haram and the suffering the terrorist group has caused, we're joined now by Sarah Crowe with the United Nations Children's Fund. Thanks so much for joining us, Sarah. Let's start with the schoolgirls. There was universal outrage after the abductions, and yet here we are talking about this a year on. Did you think at the time of this, when it happened, with all the attention this case attracted, that we'd be talking about this a year later, that there had been no rescue attempt?
Well, it is indeed a painful milestone, as you say, but it's somewhat heartening to see echoing around the world today voices in support of those girls. But it's important to note that despite this enduring pain that the families of these girls, and of course the girls themselves, are going through, no doubt, we must also take note of the 800,000 girls and boys who have now been forced to flee their homes. This is of 1.5 million people, the size of an average North American or European city. So it is an outrage that it continues because these children have lost everything. They've lost their homes, they've lost their schools. They now face all kinds of threats from preventable diseases, and indeed they are missing their childhoods.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about these 800,000 children. You just brought it up. They're scattered. Just to provide some context, that's right around the population size of the entire country of Guyana. I was looking online. The number is staggering. What does this do to a country, to these families that are torn apart, and how do you bring Nigeria back together again, at least that pocket of Nigeria, northeastern area of the country?
Well, indeed, to a community, and especially to those children who have been forced to flee, they are now scattered in amongst 4 countries. So it's Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and the northeastern parts of Nigeria. So this is no longer just an issue for Nigeria. It is for the 4 countries involved. And UNICEF is on the ground in those countries where humanitarian access allows and where security allows. And we're providing schools, child-friendly places, water and sanitation. But it's not enough because we are simply underfunded, and this is now unraveling at such a rate that we cannot keep up. So we need to remember those girls. We need to remember what's happened to the 800,000 children and what they've gone through. They've endured the most horrific nightmares of witnessed things that they should never, ever have witnessed. I spoke just on Friday in Senegal last week to a young activist who had been up in northeastern Nigeria, and he showed me pictures that are simply not publishable. They cannot be published, just showing the kind of nightmares that people have had to endure, what they've seen, and this has an impact on children that will last a lifetime.
Yeah, the trauma associated with this. School attacks, kind of the signature of Boko Haram, even before what happened with the kidnapping. We've also seen recently Al-Shabaab in Kenya, the Garissa University attack. We saw an attack on a school last year by the Taliban in Pakistan. These wholesale attacks on educational institutions obviously grab headlines. What are governments to do about this? I mean, how can they prevent them?
Well, it's immensely complex. In Nigeria, there have been more than 300 schools that have been damaged. It's a tremendous amount of schools. And of course, Nigeria has the highest number of children who are out of school as it is. More than 10 million children are out of school. So, of course, this is about control of children. Children have been used as weapons of war, as weapons in this kind of conflict. Children have no right to be in harm's way. They must be kept out of harm's way. And what we've been trying to do to keep the spotlight on these 800,000 children, but also on generally what's going on in that part of the world, which is very hard to reach. It's a very complex jungle area. You heard in your earlier report about rains, and that makes, of course, some of these parts very inaccessible. We have partnered in the last couple of days with Snapchat, and we've been using children's drawings to get Snapchat artists to depict and portray what children have seen themselves. And in those drawings, the most poignant, disturbing images that you can see what children have seen. And, you know, children seeing things like decapitations, torture, really horrific images. And it is a way of reminding the world not to give up, not to forget, and to keep the spotlight on these children and to keep supporting groups that are doing their very best to reach those children and families in need.